We told Mitterrand it was a yellow cake we're bringing in from North Saskatchewan. We told Mitterrand it was a yellow cake we're bringing in from North Saskatchewan. We told Mitterrand it was a yellow cake we're bringing in from North Saskatchewan.
That we find the current proposals to mine uranium in the province of Saskatchewan, these new proposals, to be unacceptable. And from the context of cumulative effects, which is the topic this morning, we think that the greatest cumulative effect will be the global impact of these projects on the environment. And I just want to say very briefly that I think it's now become established practice in Canada that when we're looking at issues like global warming or ozone depletion, that it's accepted that the global impact of these kind of emissions will be considered by the Government of Canada and the Government of Saskatchewan. And in fact, it is these global impacts that have made the production of greenhouse gases and ozone depleting substances increasingly unacceptable, to the point where in the case of CFCs we're now phasing them out. We think this same kind of thinking ought to be applied to the uranium industry. When it is,
I am aware that it is difficult to discuss topics that not fall within the panel's terms of reference. I therefore ask the panel's patience and understanding through my presentation. I also hope that my imperfect mastery of the English language will not unduly test the panel's patience. In Polynesia, we were always taught that if there was no uranium, there would not be any nuclear weapons testing in my country. I'm not a scientist, but if this is true, we Polynesian people realize that the bomb tested in the belly of our land is the product or the result of some product from elsewhere. There is therefore a very close relationship between what is being discussed here and what is occurring where I live. It is for this reason, which is very important to me, and without taking too much of your valuable time, that I wish to share with you directly the effects experienced by my people in Polynesia as a result of nuclear weapon testing. I will therefore address you as a native person who lives the everyday reality, which is life in Tahiti. Without entering too deeply into statistics and history, it is nonetheless important to remember that France has been testing nuclear weapons in our homeland and without our consent for about 30 years. More than 170 explosions has taken place, either atmospheric or underground. For us, Polynesian people, it means 170 explosions in the stomach of our Mother Earth. Three questions are posed to the French Center of Nuclear Experience in the Pacific. First of all, moral problem as to our complicity on the buildup of mass destruction weapons. Secondly, an ecological and medical problem as to the real unharmfulness of the nuclear test in Morurua on public health and environment. And lastly, an important economic, political, and social heritage which engages the responsibility of our authority of yesterday and today is engaged as much as of our citizens and of the French state today. The majority of my people lives in misery. That's the reality. Our relies on assistance. The violent attitude of the young people which become apparent in our society today are the consequences of this situation. We are conscious that the stop of nuclear testing we hope for a near future will not heal as by miracle the infection they have contributed to inject. But we are also ready. We are also ready for an individual awareness as to our private comportment and for a collective effort in order to stop the process of social degradation. We believe that every time we explode a nuclear device, we release enormous quantities of radioactivity in the underground, while the huge amount of pressure is dislocating the terrestrial structures. I've been to Morurua just last year with Greenpeace. We also believe that no scientist can assure us that those long-lived radioactive will remain confined safely without contaminating the water, the soil, and the air in the near future. Every nuclear test is a violation to the rights of future generations to inherit from us a safe and healthy earth. What condemns my people today is the mountains of official declarations, missions, false studies, and all media operations, etc., were orchestrated and financed directly or indirectly by the French government in order to abuse my people. Medical information on nuclear tests have always been restricted by secret. Before the nuclear test started in Morurua, my people lived by its own product. Today, with the impact of nuclear test, we live on imported goods for 95% of our consumption. Nuclear test, we believe, didn't help our people to develop with their traditional resources. Even the local government is corrupted by French public funds, which make appearing today on one side the wealthy minority with their monopoly, on the other side majority of more people, the poor people who hardly survive. Today, the nuclear powers continue to impose on us the violation of what is holy for us, that is the earth, whom we call our mother. We firmly refuse that the Polynesian people is misused as a base for the production of means of destruction for the whole planet. For us, is a premature crime against us and humanity. My friends, it was a long way you did from Morurua to Canada, mais je te salue quand même. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And so, on my farm, I've learned to ask myself questions before I do anything first. And these are the three questions that I ask myself. And I wonder if we can't apply these questions to mining and everything else that we do on this planet, because we're running into very serious trouble here. There's a lot of shallow stuff going on at this hearing. It's not your fault, but it's shallow. It doesn't deal with the issue at all. It doesn't even come close. You know, we're talking about pricing of something in the future that we don't even know anything about. But I know quite a bit about the past in Elliott Lake, and I know what it looks like right now. And I can deal with that because those are facts. And I don't have any trouble with them at all. But the questions I ask when I go to do something on my farm is I ask, what is here? a house at the moment, and my son is helping me, and we went down to look at the site the other day, and he said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I want you to answer these 3 questions before you do anything." I said, "I want you to stand around here, and if you do stand here, you can stand here till I come back from Saskatchewan if you like. But ask yourself what is here, and try and find out to the best of your ability. And after you've answered that question, ask yourself the next one. What will nature permit me to do here?" And if you think you can answer that one enough to go on to the next one is, what will nature help me to do here? And I said, if you can't answer those questions, just don't even start the tractor, leave it there. And we'll talk about it some more when I come home. Because if we can't answer those questions to our own satisfaction, then I don't want to live here. And if I can't strengthen nature that's around me, I can't strengthen myself in any spiritual way.
I don't want to be held responsible for someone else's destruction, and I want to feel safe from annihilation. Ever since the U.S.'s nuclear attack of Hiroshima and Nagasaki launched the nuclear age, no human being has been free of this threat. The 2 main uses for uranium are nuclear reactors and weapons. If a nation has a technology for a reactor, it can use the same technology to produce nuclear weapons. After Canada supplied India with a CANDU reactor technology in the early 70s, India exploded their first bomb for what they described as peaceful purposes. Aside from the bomb for peaceful purposes explanation being an oxymoron, this demonstrates clearly the inability to separate the supposedly peaceful use of the atom from military use. And as a second example, most of us witnessed the U.S.'s bombing of Iraq's nuclear facilities during the Gulf War. I don't know about you, but I was really concerned during that war. Iraq also had nuclear reactor technology for only peaceful purposes. Why would the U.S. be so concerned about sabotaging these reactors if they were only useful for peaceful purposes? And why should Saskatchewan citizens believe the U.S., Canada, and other countries when they claim peaceful reasons for wanting to buy or sell our uranium if the U.S. demonstrated that they don't trust other countries? So I'd like to use it.
The uranium nuclear cycle continues to threaten the survival of humankind in unprecedented ways. I believe the people of Saskatchewan have a moral responsibility to stop mining a product so dangerous to all life on this earth. The first uranium mined in Saskatchewan in the 50s was used exclusively by the U.S. nuclear weapons industry. From its very beginning, uranium's use was destructive. Nuclear fuel and weapons production begins with uranium. Uranium has been called the sleeping serpent by Aboriginal people, a resource best left undisturbed. The Aboriginal Australian myth states, "The rainbow serpent in the earth guards the powers that are beyond human control. Attempts to disturb its sleep will cause rainfalls of doom." The enormous destructive potential of uranium to human survival on this planet overwhelms the human imagination. The so-called peaceful use of nuclear power began without any serious considerations of the waste produced or how this toxic material could be contained. It was speculated by those involved in the nuclear industry that this would be a task to solve with time. 50 years later, there is still no solution. I conclude with the words of Kazuki Tanashi, a Japanese-American artist and peace worker. Let us listen to the global heart deep within each of us. We will know whether it is right to risk the future of the entire planet for satisfying our material needs. I plead with all my fellow Japanese and with friends throughout the world to exercise every possible means to turn around Japan's plutonium energy policy, which is certain to burden humanity with the likelihood of unprecedented disasters. And in closing,
My interest relates from my experience in northern Saskatchewan, where I worked for some 7 years as a legal aid lawyer, traveling around to the northern communities, and in doing that I was able to see firsthand the very high unemployment rates, the social and cultural disintegration from the kind of neo-colonial development that we've had in the north. the despair and the lack of self-esteem and so on. And I was also able to see, because this was during a period of time when uranium mining was being expanded in the north, the great promises and the great betrayals, the great hopes that it became to northern people. So what I'd like to ask you to keep in...
I strive to be a Renaissance woman, not a specialist in one small field. I have spent the decades of my adult life attempting to look at the big picture, trying to make a healthy world for myself and my family. I would like to raise the issue of the French government's ownership of Kojima through AEA and their ownership of the French power utility Électricité de France. I believe that this means that the AEA is mining uranium through one of its arms and selling it to itself through another arm of the same government. This being the case, it would seem that they will be selling uranium to themselves and that it would be therefore in their best interest to mine the uranium while the price is extremely low, so that they can run their power utility more cheaply and avoid the higher royalty costs that would be owed to the people of Saskatchewan, thereby benefiting France and having Saskatchewan subsidize their power costs. That Kojima is in the process of buying all of Manatgo's Canadian uranium interests further adds to this scenario. France has also been involved in atom bomb testing in the Pacific. They have taken a piece of paradise on Earth and turned it into hell. A place abundant with food now has to import what it eats. Its people have been oppressed. Is this what we want to contribute to? Because it is what we are contributing to if we continue to let these companies open new uranium mines. Europeans have done an efficient job of destroying large parts of the indigenous cultures of this continent. Now, many of the Aboriginal people don't know their own legends that state that these powerful serpent eggs should not be disturbed, lest tragedy befall mankind. Radioactive ore is a Pandora's box, and there will be no way to stuff it back into its container. Some of it originally so well hidden in our north that scientists couldn't detect it from the surface. Members of the panel, I thank you for the time you've given me and for the great effort you have been making the past many months. You hold the future in your hands. Your decision will impact and echo throughout time.
My name is Cheryl Schlickmeyer. This is Connie Gramiak, and we thank you for this opportunity to address the panel. Our presentation is titled, Working Towards the Full Nuclearization of Saskatchewan.
One of the problems about making presentations to panels of this sort is that one can get all caught up in all kinds of facts and figures, the whole bureaucracy of the industry, and I'm not knowledgeable enough about all of that to be able to speak well to it. But it seems to me as an ordinary person, I do have the ability to comprehend that a bomb can kill millions of people, that a nuclear reactor is in effect a stationary atomic bomb. I have, as an ordinary person, at least enough imaginative ability to understand that many radioactive materials are very, very long-lived. And so just on the basis of that kind of ordinary understanding, I thought that it would be worthwhile to show the logical consequences of what uranium mining involves. We're not mining uranium just for the hell of it. And while the manufacture of bombs may not actually be conducted here, it is conducted elsewhere. And it's conducted, for example, by the French, who are also very interested in our uranium, involved in uranium, and so on.
My name is Günther Wippel. I'm one of the coordinators of the World Uranium Hearing, a non-profit, non-government organization set up in 1987 to investigate the effects of uranium mining, nuclear weapons tests, and nuclear waste storage on the environment and the people. We are not only looking at the effects on the physical health of people, but also at the social and cultural impacts of nuclear developments.
I think, personally, it's not really possible to get that across to people who are in the management of nuclear companies. I think my experience with those people in Germany was pretty much they don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen to it. And if they listen to it, they use, as we say in German, both of their ears, one to listen where the words go in and the other ear where the words go out again. So they do not really take them in and listen and really make something out of it. I think the only ways they can be convinced or really beaten in a way is to meet them in their own field on the technical side of the environmental risks of uranium mining, and to show that dose limits, for example, are not met or probably are exceeded, that the dose limits are questionable, that the long-term effects of the waste disposal for the next 10 or 20,000 years are not really safe, etc., etc.
I therefore submit the documentation of the hearing, of the World Uranium hearing, which is a word-by-word transcript of the testimonies given to the panel for further consideration. It documents the other side of the coin which the proponents are busily advertising. There is no safe way to mine uranium and deal with the aftermath appropriately. The conclusion to me is very simple: leave uranium in the ground.
I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Amory Lovins and the Rocky Mountain Institute. Well, this is his future scenario for energy supply in the world of a phasing out of coal, oil, and gas, and nuclear, actually, all into soft technologies. It's pretty ambitious, but it's actually, it looks like it could be happening. I mean, it's way too early to tell, but it's very possible. Actually, all the technology is in place. It's invented to do this right now. It's just, look, there's no energy shortage. There's only a shortage of imagination, in other words.
I would like to introduce myself a little bit to the panel. My name is Jim Garrett. I'm a Lakota from South Dakota, USA, and I hold a degree in environmental science from the University of California. I run an independent environmental research center in South Dakota.
Whereas most of the people who are testifying, whether it be here or at World Uranium hearings concerning these things, are very passionate people because they understand the reproductive process in the sense that children are it, you know? Children are the most important ones. That people are so numbed, have the mental attitude that, well, I'm only one person, so what can I do? You know, it's all the problems are so monumental. But really what it takes is a lot of dedicated hard work to network with others who are of the same conviction. I think yesterday when one of the scientists was asking me to, you know, about computer simulations, you know, she wanted me to validate that her way of looking at the world and predicting future. She wanted me, by answering her question, I would have validated that way or that method of looking at the world, and I refused to do that. And when I did that, she didn't know how to respond. Absolutely lost it. She just didn't know how to go on from there. That's a real strange perception to me, that you could place so much faith in something that's so shallow. And we're working towards that now. I mean, look at what we got going right here in this interview. You know, you're creating some videotapes that will contribute to the educational knowledge of who knows where. You're talking about an exchange between European groups and Saskatoon groups here, as well as an exchange between people in South Dakota, meaning me. And that's part of it. I mean, that's the beginning part of us dealing with this problem, of learning to understand each other, right? None of us know all of it, but when we combine, there's a synergistic effect that will take place or is taking place already. And that is...
They're not interested in making money, they're interested in securing access. This is the one place in the world you can get the cheapest uranium, the best uranium, and you got the infrastructure ready to be built by the province and the government. And as far as I'm concerned, that's nothing more than neocolonialism. Nothing more than neocolonialism. The French are here as colonialists in terms of this industry. That's, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but they're here as colonialists. You look at Kojima, it's 100% owned by the French government, and you take a look, and it just, them buying out Monatco just points to this right away. They're just looking to secure access. There's very few companies left in this world that are really serious about uranium mining. They're just monopolizing on the whole thing. And the French own all these projects. The former president of AMOC is now the president of Cameco. The president of Uranium Saskatchewan is a former employee of AMOC. I mean, they're dominating the industry. They're just completely taking it over.
Could you wind it up
I
in
can
about
wind it
a
up.
minute or so, Phil?
And I just want to show just how connected this is here. And I know it's really hard to talk about people in this, but I want to talk about people in this, and that's Mr. Michel Poissonnet. I am really, really distressed that I have to sit in this room with someone who actively took part in the French weapons testing program in 2000. I find it very, very interesting that he is now here in this province mining uranium. As far as I'm concerned, he hasn't changed his occupation at all. It's the same corporation, it's the same company, I mean, he can split hairs and say, well, the company I managed was not owned by the French government. It's the same job. And last year, in February 6th, he publicly stated his support for the French weapons program. And the fact that he's here looking to mine our uranium really distresses me. And I don't think I have to answer his questions. I think he has to answer mine. I think these people have to answer our questions. They failed to really give good answers to your questions, and they're not even giving answers to mine. So I would like some answers to my questions. I have a lot of questions in here, and there's two I want to know. I want to know where's the payoff, and I want to know when's the real cumulative impact assessment going to be done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for sharing your
By saying that their strategy has been to bring about the regional regeneration of the areas proximate to the mines. This is the industry's way of selling its activities in other places in the world, and it does not stand up to the information that I've presented to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
The panel have been probably well socialized in thinking about social and economic development in the sort of dominant way, which is somehow governments regulate a market that creates wealth, and that scientists and technicians help assess negative impacts, and then governments change their regulations so that things will work out relatively well. And not only is the uranium industry on trial, but that very model, way of thinking about human development is on trial. The structure of the discourse, the social structure of the discourse, the layout of the room, the exercise of authority, it's somewhat, it's not an informal court. It's still closer to the formal court, but it's a court that's shaky. But the authority of time and direction and definition of what you can and can't talk about. I mean, they are in there pretending to figure out something about the implications of these 6 mines and 3 projects on a whole number of interrelated areas for a long time, and yet a piece of paper called the Terms of Reference that somebody who isn't even in there did is determining the outcome, so that it's what's not in that room that's more important than what's in that room. Well, is that the best humans can do in terms of communicating, learning, sharing, getting more knowledgeable about something? To actually say, well, we're not really here, we're here on the terms that other people have said we can be here. I call it industrial science. They call it physical or biological science. I call it industrial science. It's scientific in the sense that it's influenced the workings of the descriptions and understandings of certain relations in nature, but that doesn't mean it understands. And the breakdown of the system was shown over the Clough Lake high-level waste, where they actually put forward and had accepted by the board the use of the concrete vaults to take the high levels of thorium and radium and bury them. And there were places where the panel talked about this would be a safer containment system than the natural ore. And what was lacking was the common sense of a cement engineer. And some of us said, but what is the half-life of a cement casket? And of course, the whole thing was blown open. They had nobody who was thinking in common sense terms, in terms of the north and permafrost, let alone the perfectibility of cement. Well, we said, okay, maybe 125 years if you use the best stuff. We proved out to be industrial science optimists, had too much faith. The stuff was cracking within 4 years. And
some language skills and biased in favor of a scientific point of view. In that if you're just a concerned citizen and you want to say something more than just a statement of position, you have to provide references and documentation. I grew up on a farm in Nova Scotia, and I learned some things in school, and I learned some things from the land, from the animals. I learned from observation. I learned from listening to the older people in the community, in the neighborhood. Many of these people are no longer with us, and I would like to honor their memory and their wisdom. My scientific training has not taken the place of that understanding. I don't think I can really capture the full authority and the majesty, as I see it, of my native brothers and sisters' connection with this land. My people, the Jewish people, have been wandering without a homeland for several thousand years now. And sometimes it's quite graphic, how people can survive through that, but also what is lost.
Okay, my name's Naomi Hardy, and the first thing I'd like to do is dedicate this presentation to my mother, all of whose children are very concerned about the nuclear industry. And secondly, I'd like to submit this knife as an exhibit to the board to take into consideration. This knife is a weapon, and weapons can hurt people. And the uranium and nuclear industry has a weapon in their hands that you have the power to take away from them. You have the power to stop them from killing people, because they are murderers, and they are killing people. They're killing people through nuclear weapons testing, and through uranium mining, and through contamination of water supply, and through all the other things that they are involved in. And we don't have the right to let them do that. And you don't have the right to make that decision. We're just human beings. We're just people. We're just one species on this planet. And we're not that important. The only thing that really separates us from anything else, and don't say intelligence, please, because this is a very bad example of it, is the fact that we've created a lot more mess than any other species has. And we don't have a lot of time right now. Maybe a generation ago, we could have stopped things gradually, but right now, we can't let this keep on happening. It's not right.
Vision is the picture or goal for the better or best world possible. We give this vision shape and meaning by the stories we tell of ourselves. The environmentalist is very much aware of their responsibility as stewards or caretakers of the earth and humanity. With skill learned from their ancestors and spiritual leaders, they are aware of how their decisions affect every living thing now and for generations to come. They call upon all people to act with sincerity and simplicity and attentiveness to the consequences of their actions on earth and other humans. The native traditionalist sees humans as the lowest form of life, the last thing made, the most pathetic creature on earth. All other forms of life, plants, animals, and even rocks, have attained their true purpose given to them by the Creator. Do you see a tree wanting to be anything more than a tree? Humans, on the other hand, need to find their purpose. Today, many say people have lost the ability to find their given purpose and are trying to create it by themselves.
If the Saskatchewan and federal governments were serious about sustainable development, at the very least, this esteemed panel's terms of reference would include examining in detail the end uses of Saskatchewan uranium, including nuclear energy, high-level waste, export of uranium fuel to developing countries, the use of uranium in nuclear weapons and military equipment, including tanks and bullets. What has happened here instead is that the panel and we citizens have been asked to adopt a schizophrenic worldview, to pretend that uranium mining occurs in a vacuum, in isolation from nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. We are asked to deny the reality that our local short-term decisions and actions have long-lasting regional, national, and global implications. We are asked to pretend that Saskatchewan has no share in the responsibility for nuclear weapons proliferation. We are asked to assume that we are not responsible for what goes on beyond our borders, beyond the short-term economic gain. What is happening here is akin to the Rodney King tragedy. How was a jury able to find a verdict of not guilty for the police officers who were patently guilty of assault in the eyes of the world? This verdict was reached because high-priced defense lawyers broke the incriminating videotape down frame by frame. These lawyers convinced the jury that no, that particular swing of the baton was not an aggressive strike, but merely a defensive move. Rodney King's raised elbow in that frame was threatening to the police. The world was stunned when the verdict was announced because when viewed as a whole, the videotape provided overwhelming evidence that Rodney King was brutally beaten by a gauntlet of white officers outnumbering him 20-1. What this case demonstrates is that if reality is broken down enough, we can be made to believe the unbelievable. Here we are asked to break down the nuclear industry frame by frame, to examine only 3 uranium mining proposals and their artificially discrete impacts. We are asked to view uranium mining as though it occurs in isolation from nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and the scramble to find a high-level waste repository in Canada.
To be responsible citizens, students need to learn to make decisions about what is the good and the right thing to do. Such ethical consideration requires critical thinking. To make critical thinking possible requires information. Critical thinking about uranium mining and the weapons connection requires information in the classroom. To make ethical consideration possible, both critical thinking and technological literacy have been made common essential learnings in our schools in the last few years. In this presentation, I demonstrate that because the nuclear industry systematically provides curriculum supplements to schools, which omits and in effect denies the use of Saskatchewan uranium in nuclear weapons, that it is important that this material be provided otherwise.
What I've attempted to do is to show that there is a remarkable convergence, or should I say synergy of views, among Western scientists, inventors, ethicists, spiritual leaders, and theologians on the meaning of nature, and that for them nature enters into the realm of freedom and morality and places a new responsibility for us for the care and protection of nature, both for its own good and for the good of future generations. We must free our children from a legacy of nuclear waste and contamination so that they may have the freedom to pursue the exciting possibilities of post-nuclear age. Now, I have not
The impacts from the uranium mining have been a nightmare for 25 years. From my community, there's at least 100 miners that have died from lung cancer and other respiratory illnesses. I have lost my father, uncles, and relatives, and my people's livelihood have been destroyed. The mountains where we gathered herbs and medicine are contaminated. Animals are born defective. Abandoned mines, wastes are still there. There's no one around to restore Mother Earth. It is the responsibility of the First Nations and Native Americans all over to see that there's no more mining that takes place. We are the caretakers of this land. We have done enough damaging the precious land our fathers have gave us, and we have done enough killing the innocent people, the birds, the animals, and the trees.
That was my first experience doing my presentation in front of all these listeners, in front of the experts, and I assume in real simple language that I assumed they understood what I was talking about. It was something that I'll never forget, and I think our messages were carried throughout the world. The other place where I did this was in Japan, that we took a 3-week tour, meeting with the vice mayors, the mayors, the energy companies, and there again we talked to a lot of people that had expertise in this field. So I have been exposed to a lot of presentations like that in a real difficult situation. I know that I have a little problem with English, and Gunter was the same way, and Ramonia was in the same way, and we were kind of talking about that last night. We were saying that just imagine, if we were a little bit more smarter, and we would be pretty heavy.
Once again, our machine has used the same tactics as the PR department of the industry. Now, if the machine can handle this one, we'll really be into the big money. The problem of conscience has been a big one for decades. As early as February the 2nd, 1976, 3 men with 56 years of combined work experience at all levels of the nuclear industry resigned from secure and well-paying positions as nuclear engineers at General Electric. Dale Breidenbaugh, Richard Hubbard, and Gregory Miner explained their reasons for leaving to the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. Quote, "We resigned because we could no longer justify to the continued development and expansion of nuclear fission, a system we believe to be so dangerous that it now threatens the very existence of life on this planet." End quote. Okay, let's see.
Kind of hung up here, I don't know. Guess I gotta read this message. Even though I am only a machine, I am not emotional, have no heart, and no soul, I can no longer do this.
And my final point is that inevitably, some of our uranium ends up being diverted into military uses, such as the manufacture of heavy bullets and the production of nuclear weapons. Many people all over the planet are deeply concerned about the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and uranium is the raw material that feeds this industry. I don't believe that we can ever place adequate safeguards on the sales of our uranium to ensure that it will never be used for military purposes. Therefore, I see this as another reason to oppose the mining of uranium in itself. Those are my 5 main reasons for opposing these developments. And I realize that some of my concerns fall outside the stated mandate of your panel, but I believe that all of them would fall into the broad category of global environmental impacts, which I believe any environmental review needs to take into account the broader picture, and that the environment doesn't stop at the borders of our province, for better or for worse. The second part of my
the world has already experienced the obvious horror which the mining and use of uranium can inflict. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Chernobyl, and 3 Mile Island. What is not so obvious is the long-term effects on our environment, which affects every living creature on our planet. We have not solved the problems of waste disposal. We cannot guarantee a perfect technology to handle any stage of the uranium industry, and in particular, we cannot rule out the possibility of human error or terrorism at any time. We may say in Saskatchewan that we are merely mining uranium, not making bombs, but we do not have control over the ultimate use of our uranium, nor can we feign innocence about the use of it by countries such as the United States or France. We are guilty of the short and long-term destruction caused by the uranium industry, whether we choose to accept the responsibility or not. I believe the uranium industry is actually a dying industry, and we in Saskatchewan are buying into its death throes. We in third world countries. What frightens me is the motivation behind Saskatchewan's involvement in uranium. Our provincial debt left by the previous government has left us desperate for revenue at any cost. Greed and desperation do not make for wise and long-sighted decisions. I also suspect that as long as there is uranium in the ground, someone will insist upon exploiting it, and perhaps no government can prevent this. If this is true, then probably my worst fears will be realized. What I do not understand is why we are not expending all our energy and limited monies on research and development of safe, renewable resources such as solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal, and of course, conservation. I also do not believe that uranium development in northern Saskatchewan is benefiting Native people in either the short or long term. Even if they were employed extensively, which they are not, why should they be exposed to the health hazards of mining? And the mining is raping their natural environment. I suspect that if any of the people making decisions about mining had to live near or downwind or work in the mines, they would make different decisions about whether to go ahead. In conclusion, I would like to say that for me this issue is not an economic but a moral one. Short-term economic gain has brought us, the world over, to the edge of the abyss. We will all lose now and in the future, and our children will not thank us for the potential wasteland we are leaving them.
In 1978, in its response to the Beta inquiry, the Saskatchewan government stated that the appropriateness of its decision to expand uranium mining at that time would best be judged in the longer term. The government said that it would be judged a proper decision if benefits from uranium development outweigh the detriments, and if the Saskatchewan people shared the benefits of uranium development. Our written submission shows that this criterion has not been met, that uranium mining has been a drain on the real wealth of the province, rather than a profitable development of our public resource.
Due to globalization, this is the one guideline derived from all 3 values of justice, participation, and sustainable sufficiency, which points to the potential of an activity or policy to decrease the prospects of armed conflict. Activities and policies should enhance international cooperation without creating patterns of domination and dependency. They should provide for peaceful alternatives to disputes. Again, other testimony has indicated how uranium is used in nuclear weapons, for other armaments, and how continued testing of nuclear bombs does not promote the peace and well-being of the peoples of this earth. Continued uranium mining jeopardizes the fragile peace we have and continues to further the proliferation of nuclear threat and use as the way to settle disputes. 12.
Coercive development is not simply within the context of the use of force. It is also manifested when people and communities feel they have no other option except to survive. The desperate need for food, housing, and jobs leaves no other resources for some except to go with the development that destroys the essence of their community and ecosystem. The accompanying chart details the incredibly high rate of poverty in northern Saskatchewan that leaves people and communities vulnerable to development projects that may seem to offer a quick fix for economic and social problems. We raise these examples to point out that there is a major clash of 2 worlds in the discussions and decisions over development projects, and that development is not a neutral activity. Development that puts profits over people, production over ecology, resource extraction over human rights is not sustainable, and is a complete abrogation of the principles laid out in the Brundtland Commission report. We would ask the panel to consider the information given by all.
And even if we could safely dispose of all the waste, which we cannot, we're still faced with a moral question with respect to its military application. As you know full well, it is plutonium which the military requires for its arsenal, and Saskatchewan provides the uranium which countries like France, Germany, the United States, and the United Kingdom are using to produce deadly plutonium to be used in nuclear bombs. Canada supplies uranium to France. Indeed, Saskatchewan allows French companies, as we know, to mine and export uranium right here in this very province. And France continues to test nuclear devices in the Pacific Ocean in defiance of world opinion. As a Christian, as a human being, I consider that the mining and export of an element capable of mass destruction of innocent women, men, and children on a worldwide scale is little short of blasphemy. I've had people ask me why.
Lastly, all nuclear reactors, regardless of make, model, or place of origin, produce radioactive elements, notably plutonium, which can be fashioned into nuclear weapons. Some, such as the CANDU reactor, are far worse than others. It is an immutable law of physics that this plutonium and its descendants will not decay into a harmless element for thousands of years. This means that every peaceful reactor produces material that has to be guarded against accident and military or terrorist misuse for centuries. In short, mining and splitting uranium intrinsically magnifies and accelerates risk to all living things. The more we mine and split, the greater the risk. Nuclear weapons have the most terrible symbolism. They are the work of millions of years of nature compressed in a split second. One has to marvel at the genius of humankind to accomplish this technical feat, but Hiroshima has taught us that this kind of genius is diabolical. Just testing atomic weapons in the 1960s led to atmospheric contamination and left even Inuit mothers on Baffin Island 2 decades later breastfeeding strontium-laced milk to their kids. Who could imagine more innocent victims? This, to me, is a portrait of evil.
Die dan is van dit allemaal jaar lang dan dan is van dit al van dit. Goed dat dan is zo zes dat dan de je daar zo doen is. Ze doen al het zo is zo als we de ja ze was is. Goed zoals het zo is 16 years mine gaan na doen ze gaan we snel delen. Goed wat er hom mine dat al dan waren.
In terms of the environment, again, I just wanted to state the position, or not the position, but the point of economies based on resource extraction and resource use on the land. Bringing it back to my perspective from the north, like I said, I've been a trapper for almost 40 years of my life, and I'm still relatively healthy, and it hasn't really affected my health. My concern is with uranium mining and the possible implications that it could have on people's health. Because I have a younger brother who worked in the industry for about 16 years, a better part of his life, and now he's having all kinds of health problems, and I think that it could be related to that, is the point that I'd like to raise here. That in terms, I'd like to weigh the benefits of traditional land use compared to the benefits, long-term benefits, or I guess you can say effects of the industry, and I would support more traditional resource use than short-term jobs. It's once again just reiterating my point on using the land and being a part of the land. Like I pointed out already to you, I've been a user of the land, traditional user of the land for over 40 years now, and when you live on the land, you don't really require much to exist as a person. Your subsistence, I guess you can say, in terms of food and that comes from the land.
and your reliance on store-bought items, those types of things are less when you're out on the land. And when I look at our young people today, some of the people who do work at the mines and that, their health is not as good as it used to be. They may be young, that's what they rely on now, but in terms of health and some of the possible health effects that industry could create is where my concerns lay. It's just that, you know, it may sound like I'm against the industry. It's not to be interpreted like that. It's just that we would like to derive the same benefits as other resource extraction or resource use takes place everywhere else, like even in the south, for example.
Could have been University not on 1952. According to the wilderness. La honey there a large Labanoni sent out some color out light on wilderness. To take off laboni there is in the light down to one sound the train is a tie to send out light down it said. I don't believe there only no other. Honor in a lot of that when I go my old lad.
Again, just on non-benefits from the industry, our people are utilized to clear the brush, to break ground whenever mining does occur, and then we're usually shoved off to the side and other people take over the better jobs. One of my partners who's also here with me, we worked at Clough Lake to do a lot of the clearing, like the brush cutting and that by axes. And we've done that, and then once that was done, our jobs were finished. And the same incidents also arose when Uranium City began. A lot of the native people did a lot of the, I guess you can say, the groundbreaking work, and then were sort of let go once the work was done.
Rabbit Lake Golf Minerals could be the could she the nuns. Could Lavant are great handled Lavant as it all school are the great foreign. Could don't allow great tall as you Lavant alle. Could like it Atlanta get in la.
Again, just a question on education and educational levels, entry-level requirements for jobs, entry-level jobs into the mining industry. When like I said, I worked at Clough Lake. I also did some of the initial work at Rabbit Lake, and I have a grade 4 level. And right now, when I look at the changes in educational levels for entry-level requirements, I'm just wondering why the change now when it wasn't required before.
It's one
of the reasons why we ask for things like that is because we want involvement. If we didn't want involvement, we wouldn't be mentioning anything like this right now. That's it for me, thanks.
I will end by saying that I believe in the sincerity of the panel members. This gives me a glimmer of hope that public participation in this overloaded and rushed review may have brought forward enough true facts that it may have some effect.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Shield. We thank you for your efforts, and I'm sure the people of this province should be indebted to you for your hard work and on their behalf in this area. Thank you very much.
I'm really working for our descendants.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.